In today's show, we're looking at very, very, very early Dynasty rookie tiers for the 2023 NBA draft class. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball, on TikTok at redrock_bball as well. I went out of order with that one. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So, I wasn't going to do this, but I got a lot of people that did respond and say they wanted it. Now, it's Dynasty rookie tiers for Dynasty leagues, for rookies in the 2023 draft, and where I am tiering those guys. Like what order we're looking at in drafting them. Now, I have done a few days' work on this, but it is nothing compared to where we will be in May or June, right after the draft, and then in Summer League. There's going to be a lot of changes. This is the initial stuff. There are players in my database who I've converted who've actually said they're going back to college. So that needs to be adjusted. I need to actually start breaking down these players individually and what they can do, what they can't do. All of this stuff here is based purely off individual stat translations without much context applied to it at all, if any. And it's got nothing to do with personal opinion from me as to where these guys should be picked based on what I've seen from them, what I know about them, what I've spoken to other people about with these players. So bear that in mind. This is where we start. This is the initial part. I'm still tweaking some formulas to get these rankings and tiers in the right spots, to take into consideration the impacts of certain factors. We are a long way away, but people asked for it, so you can see what I've got cooking up at the moment, where we are sitting with these guys. What I like to do is get their stats and get everyone's minutes from wherever they played per 40 minutes to account for discrepancies in playing time, adjust the pace so that we're talking possessions versus minutes, and then convert everyone's production to a 30-minute role in the NBA as a rookie. Now, that's great. Most rookies won't play 30 minutes. So what we then try and do is give a weighting to the guys who are picked higher in the draft, who usually get gifted more minutes early on, even if they're maybe not quite there. And we also give a dynasty bump to players who are younger. Because, of course, someone coming in at age 23 versus someone coming in at age 19, the age 19 player has 4 years to get to the same age and development as the 23-year-old is in their first season. So it's a significant advantage, even if that player could be worse for year 1, year 2. So bear all that in mind. It's a big preamble. We've got lots to get because, actually, we'll talk about that now. I'll talk about the other thing with this in a second. It is, I'm always hesitant to put stuff out that's half-baked or half-cooked. This is probably 20% cooked. But we'll go through it. It'll bring some discussion. Warning.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. Tier 1 and Tier 2. You can see the names on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. We'll talk about it audio in a second. One of the big problems with this is how the hell do you convert stats from Overtime Elite? We've had one player from Overtime Elite enter the NBA so far, and that's Dominic Barlow. He wasn't even drafted. He barely played. He played down the stretch. He played some good games, but I like to get a sample size. Like even G League Ignite players, we still don't have a full sample. So we've got about 7 players, I think, who have come from G League Ignite into the NBA. College players, European players, I've got thousands of college players, hundreds of NBA players. Like over the last couple of years, I think we've got like 150 whatever college players coming in over the last 3 or 4 years that we can look at their stats from college, look at their stats in the NBA and go, here's a reasonable approximation without actually digging in and individually going through each place. That's what this part is. We don't know where they're going to be and what team they're going to be. And even then, like, we do that stuff when we hit September, when we know how the teams all shake out, and then we can progress their individual stats on that first team, and then we see what happened in their first season and then go from there. But Overtime Elite, I've got no idea. Haven't seen it. We haven't seen a player come from Overtime Elite, really. You can't use a sample size of one to say, well, look what Don Barlow did at Overtime Elite, and then translate his numbers, and that converts across to everybody coming through. So, let's start tier 1, Victor Wembanyama, right? I think that the way his stats project out in 30 minutes a night, he looks like a top 50 player straight away. I think he could finish higher than that. I think he's going to get drafted round 2 in fantasy leagues. He's going to get drafted top 10 in dynasty leagues, and I would absolutely take him top 10 in a dynasty league, no problem at all. I think actually probably you could consider top 5 in a dynasty startup. If you're talking about overall, I would consider that for Victor. He's going to go 1 in every single dynasty rookie draft. He should. There's no reason not to. His stats project out well. We know the hype of him as being a generational talent. There's nothing more. There's not more to say. I will say, even though there's not more to say, I will say that he almost wasn't alone in tier 1. He almost wasn't alone. Because the stats that Amen Thompson and Asir Thompson, I might get some of the pronunciations of these guys' names wrong as well because I haven't watched much of them. Asir, Amen Thompson and Asir Thompson. Anyway, I apologize for getting that wrong. Their numbers came out insane because they both averaged over 3 steals per game as point guards, and they both averaged like 1.5 blocks per game. Oh, and gigantic rebound numbers and gigantic assist numbers. Everything that they were putting up in Overtime Elite, again, it is Overtime Elite. We don't really know how it all goes. But the numbers that these blokes were putting up were pretty crazy. I'm just going to try and bring it up and have a look on my list where they are. Their stats in Overtime Elite, because it's not easy to find these stats. Like, Amen Thompson shot 57% from the field, but 25% from 3. He averaged 8.5 rebounds, 8.5 assists, 3.4 steals, and 1.3 blocks. Like, those are literally insane numbers. Asir Thompson shot only 48%, but 30% from 3, but averaged 10.5 rebounds, 9 assists, 3.5 steals, and 1.7 blocks. Those are literally crazy numbers. They would immediately, like, I tried to put translation factors over, sort of blending what we saw from Europe and G League Ignite and college numbers. And it made them top 20 players as rookies, or top 30 players as rookies. So I had to sort of tone down, because they play at an insane pace, to tone down some of the steal numbers. I had to tone it down a bit, because they just would have ended up in a crazy spot. In the end, their initial projections, Asir and Amen came in at 51 for Asir and 63 for Amen Thompson, because Asir had the higher steal and block rate and was a better 3-point shooter. But that's per 30 minute translating across. Now, they are a little bit older. They're a year older than Victor, both 20 years of age. And they're going to go lower in the draft. Asir's going to go below Amen most likely in the draft. But they were real close to being in tier 1. I will say also this, if you are watching this, tier 1 Victor Wembanyama, we're done, he's there. Tier 2, the names in that list, they're all in the same tier, but they are in my order of preference at this moment. At this moment. Okay, so it's Amen, Asir, and Scoot Henderson is the next one in tier 2. Scoot's numbers don't translate that well across. Like, they're fine. They translate better than like a Jaden Ivey or Benedict Mathurin as like point guard, hybrid shooting guard type of players who translated horribly last season. Like, he comes out way better than that. 150-30 comes out. But that's still not top 60 like these other guys like Victor, Amen, and Asir. He gets a boost because we know his age is great. He's 19. He's younger than Victor. He's a full year younger than the Thompsons. He's going to go pick 2 most likely. So that gives him a boost. So he pushes into tier 2, Scoot Henderson. Be very, very intrigued to see how these guys end up working out when they translate across. It's going to be intriguing. I think that's the best way of being able to state, like, what numbers are they going to be able to... Scoot, I think, is going to score well. He gets some good assists. Can he get steals? He's shooting. There's some iffiness with that. But just think of him as like a better profiled Jaden Ivey as a rookie. And Ivey ended up like on the fringes of 150s. So that's sort of where he sits, I think. But I would, if you wanted to take him pick 2 in a Dynasty rookie draft, I think it's totally fine because, again, there's a lot of doubt about the Thompsons and how those stats translate. Not whether they're going to be good players because they're already freak athletes, unbelievable freak athletes. But how the stats actually translate across could push them down. And that's why this is very, very early. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite event should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, theatre, whatever it is you need near you. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. With that, you can stop stressing for tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you will have. They got flash deals they throw up. Hey, last-minute tickets, you want to go see this? We got them. Cheap. Go get it. That's awesome. You want to go see that your team you want to see, the playoffs are on, get a last-minute ticket on Game Time. It is there. You get images of seat views, and the low price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, etc. are great options for you as well. Don't have to plan months in advance. Just go straight on there, game day. Tickets are there. Get them. Ready to go. So easy. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, or use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's go to tier 3. 3 players in tier 3. It's Brandon Miller, it's Cam Whitmore, and it's Jarris Walker. I think it's Jarris. Again, my pronunciation on these guys is off because I haven't actually, this is sort of a last minute idea to do this podcast. I haven't looked into these guys' film. I normally wouldn't do this yet. Brandon Miller, Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker. Brandon Miller, some people think might go 2 over Scoot Henderson. He is a full year older than both Scoot and Victor. He's the same age as the Thompsons and a little bit older. He's probably going to go top 3 almost without a doubt. He had a shocking NCAA tournament. We know this. He projects like 127th translated rank heading in. Now, compare this year's draft to last year's draft. Very few players were able to translate at the top end of the draft last season with high fantasy numbers. Very few. This season, lots of them do. In fact, out of most of the top 10, I think nearly every one of them projects, out of my projected top 10, nearly every one of them projects to be a top 160 player. And you don't really ever get that fantasy translations. You'll get the guys like Ivy who projected like 220th or Mathurin at 300th or whatever it was. In just pure stats translation. Like some bad ones like that. This year, these guys all have great scouting prospects and great analytic translations as well for most of these guys. So Brandon Miller, Cam Whitmore from Villanova, and Jarris Walker from Houston. The other thing you'll notice in this draft class as well, there's not huge amounts of bigs or not huge amounts of point guards. There are the Thompsons, who are sort of point guards, and Scoot. Thompson's a bigger point guard, Scoot's a smaller one. And then there's just a lot of switchy, wingy forward players, which is very interesting because that's what the NBA loves, doesn't it? You don't find many, and often the guys who really stand out as big leapers, like Walker Kessler was the conundrum for us last year, where he projected like 26th or 28th or whatever it was, and him and Chet was so high because you get these high shot blocking centers that push up with high field goals, high rebounds, and that translates over really well. And we saw it with Kessler already. There's not many of those guys, although there is a guy, and his name will really stand out, I think, when we look at tier 4, but we'll get to that in a second. Brandon Miller in tier 3, Cam Whitmore and Jarris Walker. Whitmore is young. I think he might be the youngest. Oh, no, he's not quite the youngest. GG Jackson's the youngest player in this draft class. But both, Cam Whitmore and GG aren't even 19 yet. Cam's going to be there in July, August. I think he turns 19 around then. So he's super young. He's like 6 months younger than Scoot and Victor, a full year and a half younger than the Thompsons and Brandon Miller. It's a big difference. And then Jarris Walker is 19 as well. He's probably going to go top 7 in the draft, and he translates solidly as well. These guys were all relatively close. That's why they're in the same tier, obviously. But in saying that, go back to tier 1, like Victor was significantly ahead of the Thompsons. And try again. Victor was tier 1. Tier 2, the Thompsons were actually significantly ahead of Scoot. They were still in the same tier, but they were significantly ahead. But there is that OTE translation effect. Can't wait to talk to some OTE people on the podcast to break these guys down. Tier 4 is a big boy. It's a chunky one. It's a big chungus, in fact. Got 6 names in Tier 4. 6 names. Cason Wallace. He's here in this spot. Probably maybe not being a top 10 pick. But one thing when we look at him from a real life manual adjustment ranking situation, he's a Kentucky guard. And we know Tyler Hero, Devin Booker, Emmanuel Quickley. Kentucky guards, it's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It's a fair bet that their value is going to exceed their draft position. So remember that with Cason Wallace. Really good defender as well. Only 19, translates top 150. Taylor Hendricks, 19, probably top 10 pick. Again, with my very rudimentary scouting of these players, Hendricks, from a real life perspective, Hendricks is a guy I really, really like. I could really see, I'm going to do multiple mock drafts, but I could see me doing a screw it, forget consensus. I could end up taking him at 4. That's how my early take on Taylor Hendricks is that. Very early. So he slides in here at Tier 4. The guy who stands out, who is not a projected top 10 pick in this group, is Derek Lively II, center from Duke. Lively projects basically as a top 100 player. Stat translation coming across. He's only 19. He's young. That just reminds you of that meme. What's it? She said she was 13. She's only 19. He's probably going to get picked in the 20s. But you want to talk about that? His numbers aren't quite as... Walker Kessler, for example, per 40 pace-adjusted block numbers last season, 6.9. Lively's per 40 pace-adjusted block numbers this season, 4.9. Still very, very strong, but not as good as Kessler's. That's why he doesn't project up to be like the 22nd best player. But he's got the advantage here of being a guy that can block shots, blocked at a high rate. So for a guy that's probably going to get picked in the 20s, to push here to be like the 10th best rookie from a dynasty perspective, and in Tier 4, shows that little bit of a... He's probably one of the big standout guys where you go, okay, didn't expect that. Anthony Black from Arkansas, probably a top 10 pick, another 19-year-old. Actually, when I said before that all those top 10 guys projected as top 160, he's the one who didn't. He projects outside the top 200. So a little bit of a red flag there, but that's why he pushes behind Whitmore and Jarris and Brandon Miller. But often, those guys who have bad rookie seasons, what ends up a lot of the time taking over is draft position and age. By the time you hit year 3, year 4, they've figured it out. But it could be shaky for him early on. Keontae George, and who else have we got? Grady Dick. These are guys, everyone's 19 here. Out of every player that I've given you, the oldest player is actually Brandon Miller, who's 20 and a half. And then it's the Thompsons at 20.2. Everyone else here is 19, or in Whitmore's case, 18. So the younger players get the boost. They're also the better players. That's another thing with this draft, is the high-level players are the young players. And that's, again, why we love this draft from a real-life perspective, but also from a dynasty perspective. There is some very interesting stuff in this group. So Cason Wallace, Taylor Hendricks, Derek Lively, Anthony Black, Keontae George, Grady Dick. And looking at that, the top 2 to me really stand out, Wallace and Hendricks. Hendricks I really like as a player. Wallace, the Kentucky guard bump. Very interested to see what he can do in the NBA. The other guys, Lively, I'm not sure about. Black, yeah, good pedigree. George is an interesting player. And Dick, yeah, I think he's better than like your stereotypical white shooters like a Corey Kispert from a fantasy perspective. And he projected out pretty nicely as well, heading into this draft tiers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy, but it's not daily fantasy that you've seen before. It's daily fantasy for player projections. That's it. It's points, it's rebounds, it's threes, it's assists, and you pick one of them and you go, more or less, let's do it. We might see Prize Picks. Is it going to do for Summer League? We looked at Victor's blocks numbers, and you go, hey, I think he's going to do more than that. What about Scoot's points numbers? We'll go more. You can do 2 to 6 of those in a lineup, 25 times your entry feedback. It's easy. You do it in under 60 seconds. It's easy to do in over 30 US states. You can do it in majority of Canada. You can do it for lots of sports. When college basketball's on, you can do it for that. You can do it for the NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball season, PGA golf, MMA, boxing, NASCAR, cricket, European basketball, and of course, disc golf. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Okay, let's go to tiers 5 and tier 6. A little bit skinnier tiers here. In tier 5, so we're at tier 5, we're at player number 14. I've got Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State. Hope I get all these colleges correct. I've been trying to learn these players' colleges. Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State and Leonard Miller, who I thought probably could have been drafted last season. He's from the G League Ignite. Now, Miller is still only 19. He could have been drafted last season, but he is still like he's the same age as Victor. He is hyper young. He is probably going late first round, but just watch. If he ends up going top 15 or top 16, he will shoot in probably into tier... I'm just going to have a look at this because I've got a little spreadsheet in front of me where I can do this. Yeah, look, if he goes top 15, Leonard Miller, he'll jump into tier 3 because I do weight draft position a little bit on these guys. He's like a rangy 6'9" forward, I believe. Stat translations were excellent for him coming out of the G League. Really, really good, which, didn't necessarily think that would be the case, but he scored well. He rebounded well. Okay steals and blocks, but really good efficiency. 54, 79 as some of his percentage translation numbers. They translated very, very strongly coming across out of the G League. So he's an interesting player there. Sensabaugh is like a shooter. Just going to look at where I can find his numbers before I go too much and tell you about it. Bryce Sensabaugh, where are we? He averaged only 24 minutes a night, but he took like 21 attempts per 40 minutes. He shot 48%. He shot almost 8 3-pointers per 40 minutes and hit him at 40%. Is that all he does? That's always going to be your issue. He got to the line quite a bit, which is encouraging. He rebounded strongly. I'm not sure how much that carries over. But he is a player who translated across well. And of course, as I'm sure all of these guys are, he's relatively young. Yeah, he's 19 as well. Tier 6 is Derek Whitehead and Jordan Hawkins. And Jordan Hawkins is by far now the oldest player on this list, coming in at number 17 in Tier 6. He's 21. He's just turned 21. He had a great NCAA tournament run for Connecticut. Looks to be probably the best shooter in this draft class. Definitely like the best movement shooter coming off screens, which is hyper valuable. But he's 21. He projected okay, but he does get dinged a little bit for being a guy who stepped up as a shooter at age 21. That's always going to have a level of concern for me. He's not super, super old. He's not 23, but it does ding you a little bit when you are 2.5 years older than like a Cam Whitmore. It's a big difference. But Hawkins comes in here as a good shot maker. And Whitehead, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know a huge amount about Derek Whitehead. He is only 18 though. He's a guard / wing, I believe, who's probably going to get drafted in the 20s, who attempted a ton of threes and hit him at a strong way. He's 42% three-point shooter. That's part of why his value came across, and also generated steals at a pretty good rate as well. And another one of those players that I think if he ended up getting drafted higher than where my mock draft average has him, which is, let me double check that, got him at almost 20 as an average draft position across mock drafts. If he ended up going at 12, then you'd see him jump up a couple of tiers as well. He didn't translate super great, Derek Whitehead coming across, because he had some deficiencies in other areas, but the steals were nice and the 3-pointers were pretty strong, but he believed he was quite a low usage player, which is somewhat of a concern. But he'll get threes, he'll get steals, and then you just hope the other stuff comes across. Tier 7. 3 players. 2 from Michigan. Kobe Buffkin is getting the Bronco Jalen Williams bump at the moment. Every draft thing I listen to or read, it's Kobe Buffkin. I'm hearing, so he's only 19. He's not older like Jalen Williams, but a guy that, this is not how I know, but playing NBA 2K, you download draft classes, right? Which were created, say, 6 months ago. He's not even in the draft class for the 2023 draft class, Buffkin. All these other guys are. He's not. So it makes you think like he had a big step up, and he's just rising and rising and rising. He's only 19. He translated okay. He'll probably, at the moment, he's getting mocked in the 20s. I think he'll probably end up going top 20 and maybe pushing a little bit higher. His teammate Jet Howard, who at Michigan's Juwan Howard's son, he's getting mocked just sort of around the lottery zone. He's like, again, like so many players in this draft class, he's a wing/guard sort of a player. He's only 19, as I mentioned. He's probably going to go, he could go lottery, but I don't think he goes like top 10. He played 32 minutes a night for Michigan. He shot tons of threes, 9.4 attempts per 40. Got up at 37%. It's just, what else is he going to do? Because his steal rate was putrid and block rate was pretty good for the position he plays. So we just need a little bit more out of him. And the other one there is Brandon Podziemski. I think that's how we pronounce that one. Now, Podziemski is a little bit older. He's 20. He is an interesting player in this exercise because his ADP is the first guy that's appeared as a second-round guy. He's not like he's 21 or 22 here. He's 20. So he is a little bit older than these guys, but not significantly. But he's got an average mock position of 38. And that's the first second-round guy that appears here in Tier 7. Now, that might be, you could see him go, in some of the mocks I've looked at, he is going in the first round. Most of it's late first round. But this is a guy that, again, shot unbelievably well from 3, 44% on 6 attempts. And he's just an interesting, like that shooting is valuable. And he also got almost 2 steals per 40 minutes. So steals and threes with strong rebound numbers as well, and almost 4 assists. Again, you have to scale some of it back because of his role in the college, and that's the sort of stuff we'll do. But he is an intriguing lower guy to look at. Tier 8. We're only doing 9 tiers. I'm not going to go through every player because I've got 115 players in my database. We're not doing that. Tier 8, 3 guys. 2 guys who I'm very interested in here, and 1 guy not so much. So while they all come out in the same spot, to me, when we go back and finalize these tiers, they won't come out this way. G.G. Jackson from South Carolina, who is the youngest player in this draft. He's 18.3, if we're going to do decimal ages. Noah Clowney from Alabama, 18.8, who's like a versatile forward. So is Jackson. And then the other one is Chris Murray. Keegan Murray's brother, who's going to be 23, basically draft night. I think August, I think he's 23 actually. For Iowa. That's just old as shit, man. And he's not as good as Keegan, and it's just too old. So, yeah, his stats translate okay, Keegan. He's going to get picked, or Keegan, Chris, he's going to get picked in the 20s. But, yeah, that's old, man. Like, I just wouldn't be picking him that early. And I think in the end, he'll drop down probably out of this group. Clowney and Jackson, though, really interesting players. Just some forwards with defensive versatility. And their translations weren't great, especially GG's was terrible. So far, of every player we've mentioned, he's translated the worst. And I think he would have translated out of everyone we end up mentioning like 4th worst. There's a couple of guys in the next tier who don't translate that well. But he translated outside the top 300. But he's young. He's going to get picked in the 20s or so, maybe higher. And I think there's a lot of moldability with him. It could be ugly, though. And Noah Clowney he translated okay. But see, the difference you have here is, like, let's say GG translated at 304th, Clowney 247, Chris Murray 144. All in the same tier because one bloke's 4 years older than the other two. And the other two, GG and Clowney, they're probably actually all going to get drafted in a similar area. And then tier 9, which is a big boy. It's a chunky one. We've got 8 names in it. This is where Kyle Filipowski translated across, but he looks like he's going back to Duke, so he's not included in this list. Maxwell Lewis, who's from Pepperdine, who's getting a little bit of buzz, 20 years of age. Nick Smith, who came in as like a guaranteed top 10, top 6 sort of player, struggled quite a bit in college, and at the moment his mock ADP is like 12. He was dealing with some sort of an injury, but he's the guy that just translated the worst, 385th. Horrible numbers. But he just turned 19. So that plus his draft position keeps him in this zone, and again, I think I'll probably end up with him a little bit higher than this. Like, I'd almost definitely take him above Chris Murray. But again, this is my initial stat projection stuff. To Quavion Smith, interesting decision from this bloke, who probably should have been a top 20 pick last year and decided to go back to college, hurt his draft stock, and come out in a stronger draft. Solid enough shooter, but he's very skinny, very weak. Second-year player, sophomore. Still only 20, though. He's still young. Colby Jones, a little bit older, 21. Probably going to be a first-round pick. Jalen Hood-Schifino, Indiana. Maybe a lottery guy, probably just outside the lottery as a combo guard sort of a player. Didn't translate particularly strongly, though, outside the top 300. Marcus Sasser from Houston, strong shooter, translated well, but he's old. He'll be 23 by the time the NBA season starts. So there's some value in him, but he's old. He's same age as Chris Murray. Rayan Rupert from France, who played in the NBL in Australia, had a wrist problem most of the season. He's still young. He's only 18. Well, he's turning 19 very soon. I think that he is a really interesting international player whose stats translated horribly, as so many do coming out of the NBL. He's probably a guy that if you're looking in Dynasty, you're probably 2-3 years away from really any sort of impact. But I do think he's an interesting body type for sure. Played some point guard growing up. Just heard him on NBA Big Boy with Rafael Barlow talking about how he played point guard growing up. And the last guy I'm going to talk about is Bilal Coulibaly. Coulibaly, yeah, who plays in France on Victor's team. He is 18 as well. He's super young. I'm seeing him getting mocked basically end of first round. Again, like a guard, small forward type of player. Translated okay. Decent defensively. Probably needs some work on his shooting numbers, I believe. If I go back and have a look at his shooting numbers playing for Metropolitans, he only played 15 minutes a night. Oh, actually, no, his shooting numbers were unbelievable. So they've got to tone down. He shot 50% from three in those games for, Metropolitans. But, yeah, in a very, very low role on low volume, like 1.8 attempts per 40 minutes is like an insanely low number. So he just doesn't. So, yes, good shooting numbers, but not a shooter is what we're trying to get at. And he didn't hit his free throws either. But he's a good steals guy, decent blocks guy as well as a wing. So there you have it. There's my Dynasty rookie tiers. Again, the biggest grain of salt you'll ever see. We take this with because it's before any prospect work's been done. It's a initial thing based on stat translations and mock ADP positions. I hope it's useful for you, but I also want to hear what your thoughts are. What do you think there? We got to 33 players there, with Coulibaly being Coulibaly being the 32 players. He's the 32nd player in the 31st player actually, because I took Filipowski out. 31st player, 9 tiers. Let me know. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And if you're here on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.